Welcome to the 2022 Spring Meetings Governor Talks series. I'm Abebe Selassie, Director of the African Department of the IMF. Today, I have the pleasure of welcoming Minister Musokotwane, Minister of Finance of Zambia, to discuss the Minister's economic reform agenda and how the IMF can help. Minister, thank you so much for agreeing to participate in this Governor Talk series.
It's a pleasure to be here, and thank you so much for bringing me over for this interview.
Thank you, Minister. So, President Hichilema's administration, of course, came to power last year with a strong commitment to create a united, prosperous, and equitable Zambia. If I may, what have you found to be the biggest challenges so far in the early months of your new administration?
Once again, thank you very much indeed. The challenges that we've faced, number one, of course, the issue of the debt unsustainability of the country, meaning that we borrowed too much up to the point when we're not able to service the debt anymore. With serious macroeconomic consequences, such as not having enough money to invest into social sectors, not enough money to service their own debt, therefore defaulting. As we see right now, we are defaulting. Not enough money to create stable macroeconomic conditions, meaning that there was pressure for the exchange rate to go over the roof. So those are the kind of challenges that we face on the macroeconomic front. But also related to that is the age-old issue of the economy not growing sufficiently. 10 to 12 years ago, the economy was growing strongly. But with the COVID and this problem of debt that I've just indicated, eventually, the economy was actually contracting rather than growing. And the other problem is that of youth unemployment. Our government came into office on the back of dissatisfaction by the youth for lack of adequate job opportunities. That is a very serious problem, and we are geared for it. I'm sure we are going to touch on this as we go. So for now, in summary, I would say the issue of the debt and sustainability, stagnating economy, then youth and employment. Those are the three most important issues. There are other issues, but I think those are the most critical ones.
Thank you. I think these three issues you highlight, debt, the challenge of raising growth to a higher trajectory, and above all, at the end of the day, economic outcomes are about creating opportunities for people. So exactly. Jobs are indeed issues that we see in common in many other countries. So hopefully we'll get a chance to drill down on those. So if I may, so you came into government, and the first, I think, opportunity you had to embark on, your set of, to put forward your set of policy priorities, of course, was your budget. If I could ask a little bit about how you went about thinking, how you allocate resources, how you raise revenues when you're formulating the 2022 budget.
Yes, in the 2022 budget, first of all, we were saying to ourselves, what kind of promises did we give to the electorate? Because it's no good, and I think we've seen this happen so many times. You make promises only for the purpose of winning the elections, but we had to ask ourselves the question, where should we put money? Now, what we did was to go back to the promises, and one of those promises was to have free education up to the end of secondary school. In the past many years, education became the privilege of just a few people because you had to pay for it. Given the situation of overall poverty in the country, which has been increasing, many children were not able to go to school because their parents could not afford. So we stuck onto the promise that we made to the electorate that education would be free up to secondary school. So we allocated sufficient amount of money to make sure that education became free, and I'm happy that this was done. Right. The other thing, still in the area of education, service delivery was inadequate, mostly because we did not have enough teachers in the country. There has not been sufficient recruitment to take account of natural wastage and also the growing population. So we put in the money in the budget, that would enable us to hire 30,000 teachers. 30,000 teachers. We must here remember that in most years, we hire 2, 3, 4, 5,000 teachers. But actually there's a backlog because we are told that, well, especially for a person like me who is a constituency, I've seen it in my own constituency. A school that should have 6, 7 teachers only has 2 teachers. How can the quality of education be guaranteed? None. So as a starting point, we put money in the budget to hire 30,000 teachers. Similarly, in the health sector, we put enough money to hire 11,200 health workers at all levels, professional doctors, nurses, and of course, other auxiliary staff. And then we had still in the social sector, we enhanced the level of cash payments to eligible people, mostly the aged and the lame and handicapped. Then also, we had a lot of arrears for people who have retired from public service who were not being paid. So again, we put enough money to pay for those. So I think that was the focus of the budget. I spoke about the quality of service, social services in the rural areas, teachers, medical staff, and so forth, but infrastructure itself, the quality of the classrooms, the absence of adequate desks in the schools. Now, to deal with this, we had to implement what we call a decentralized budgeting system, whereby each constituency was allocated an amount of money that's just over $1 million, about $1.6 million, so that they can deal with their issues of building more classrooms, building more health facilities, buying more desks, buying more books, because we discovered that providing for those services at the center, it was not practical. Okay. Because people at the center just don't focus enough on the rural areas. So we said this money will go direct to the rural areas, let them choose their priorities, whether it's the classrooms, whether it's clinics, whether it's putting up a small bridge over a small stream, let them deal with those issues. So that was part of the process. Now, you also asked the question, where did the money come from?
Typical IMF question, no?
Yes, typical IMF question. And I think it's an important one. And I'm also happy that the IMF that I used to know in the 80s, 90s, today is an IMF that perhaps cares more, not about what is your ceiling of spending, but also within that ceiling of spending, where are you spending the money on? It is an IMF that cares about education. It's an IMF that cares about health. It's an IMF that cares about the quality of service delivery. So the money, of course, came from the budget, but I'm happy to say that the IMF gave us a grant through those allocation of special drawing rights. I think what came to us was $1.2 billion US. And a lot of what I said what we are going to do, it was partly financed through that generous grant, which for me is amazing because this is the first time that the IMF has given so much money as a grant, of course, to all the countries in the world, but including ourselves. We wish more would have been done for poor countries than ourselves, and this is something that we are going to discuss while here. Part of the money also came from choices that we have to make out of our budget. previously, we're spending quite a lot of money on subsidies. Subsidies on farmers. Yes, those subsidies still continue, but we had to deal with subsidies that we felt could no longer be justified. Examples, the subsidies on fuel. We're spending direct subsidies plus absence of taxing fuel. Those subsidies were amounting to something like $800 million per year. Now, for a country like Zambia, that is a lot of money. We understand the price of fuel, as everybody knows, keeps on going up. It is going up further because of the war in Russia. And we understand the pain that this is putting on the population of Zambia, including those who are in employment but with low-level incomes, who can now hardly afford or cannot afford to jump on a bus because the fares have become expensive. We understand all that. But we have appealed to our people to say, you who can't afford to jump on a bus or drive, you have to cut down on your driving errands. But remember, there are also citizens who cannot go to school. Their children are left behind, which means poverty with them is going to be there for the whole generation, because if children not go to school, that is permanent poverty. There are women out there in the countryside whose, when it's time for them to deliver, they have to walk maybe 30, 40, 50, even 60 kilometers to get to the nearest health facilities. There are children whose quality of education is heavily compromised because they are not teachers. So between those of us who say fuel is expensive and those of our people who, if we leave them like that, will be permanently under poverty, where should we put the money? And the choice that this government made was, sorry guys, we understand the pain that this thing is bringing to you, but let's not leave a whole segment of the population behind because they can't go to school. So those subsidies had to be moved from fuel into the services that I'm talking about.
Thank you, Minister. So, two questions. I think what strikes me as you're laying out your priorities and how you went about financing them is a significant shift in terms of what Zambia was emphasizing in terms of priorities in recent years. In previous administrations seem to be focusing on spending on infrastructure, roads and the like. You're telling me now you're emphasizing more human capital. If you could say a little bit more, I mean, and you really elucidated it very, very nicely, but there must still be a constituency demanding more infrastructure still. It's not that all of your infrastructure needs have been addressed. I'm talking about hard infrastructure, not just the infrastructure to support more recruitment in teachers, classrooms, etc. So if you could say a little bit about, how you navigated the political economy of shifting resources to human capital when there's still a need to address hard infrastructure needs.
Yes, it's not an easy situation, but the point is that human beings who are there, their requirements must be addressed now and then. Make no mistake, the demand or the requirement for infrastructure in a poor country like Zambia is enormous and fully justified, because we have lots of land which we should be attracting investors to come and exploit, local people themselves. So infrastructure is required, the roads are required, power is required. But we had to make this choice so that we don't leave certain people behind. But beyond that, I also want to say that some of the infrastructure that is required, because we don't have the money, we are going through the PPP route, public-private partnership route, for those that are viable to the private sector. An example of this is the road from the capital, Lusaka, all the way to the Copper Belt where the mines are. There's lots of traffic there. The private sector have made an assessment that they can invest and be able to return their capital. So we are going through the PPP route. This is a road that was previously targeted for borrowing money at a very exorbitant amount of money, $1.2 billion to do the road. We don't have it. We have to put it into the human beings, as I said earlier on.
Mm-hmm.
But the PPP route is viable. And we're exploring further routes. I think there are some, so far there are some indications that there are several roads coming out of Congo DRC through Zambia to the ports in Namibia and so forth. There are quite a number of them that appear to be viable, and the private sector have already indicated that they are going to do these roads. So if some of the roads can go into the PPP route, the financial burden in the country is lower for the rest of the roads that are not financially viable. I also want to say that given the genuine need for infrastructure that is there, we believe that other than for the PPP route, we have to do something to make the economy to grow faster. Because when the economy is bigger, it will be able to, we'll be able to generate more tax revenues, which we can finance those infrastructures that are not possible under private arrangements. This is why we have talked about the need to grow the mining sector, which is the mainstay of the Zambian economy. The mining sector of Zambia has been stagnating in the last 10 years. You recall in the 90s, the mining sector declined even further, producing just 200,000 tons of copper. When 20, 30 years earlier on, in the 70s, we were producing almost 800,000. 10 years in the period from 2003 to about 2011, 2012, we saw mining expanding, rising from 200,000 tons to about 800,000 tons. Then the last 10 years, it stagnated. Now we are saying we are going to relook at the environment for prospecting because mines come from exploration. We are also going to look at the environment itself for operating mines so that we are able to attract more. We plan that in the next 10 years, output from the mining sector should rise from 800,000 tons now to 3 million tons. Okay. So that this sector, this important sector, can generate the resources that are required to invest back in the social sectors, but also to deal with the issues of infrastructure. So mining is very important, but also because everyone is talking about the green economy now, we believe that we are there at the right time when green economy takes over from the diesel engines, takes over from the petrol engines, because electrical motors can be, will now be utilized. And we are creating an environment that makes it conducive from some of these car manufacturing companies that we'll talk to come and do the motors in Zambia. Okay. So that is the plan that is there.
Thank you, Minister. As a follow-up question, this is very helpful, by the way. One thing that strikes me is, you were, of course, minister between 2008 and 2011, okay? How do you see your current stint? How does it compare with the challenges that you faced when you were minister in that period? Then, too, you were facing a global financial crisis, of course, higher food and fuel prices. How does the latest round of spike in food and fuel prices in the wake of Russia's invasion of Ukraine compare with that time? And more generally, kind of, how do you see Zambia's situation relative to what it was going through during the global financial crisis?
Yeah, the global economic financial crisis, the good thing that time was that because of the financial architecture in the developing world, such as Zambia, the contagion, or rather the effects of what was happening here with the advanced financial system did not really hit us directly there. It hit us indirectly through loss of demand for everything. But we dealt with it that time, this collapsing demand, because we were able to deal with it because, again, we relied a lot on the copper industry. If we were to insulate the mining sector from the loss of demand, then of course would maintain a sound economic environment. So at that time, we had to make adjustment to the tax regime in the mining sector so that those who felt that closing the mines found that actually there was no incentive from the profit motive point of view because we gave incentives. Of course, we attacked left, right, and center, but the good news is that the economy was sustained. Now, today, we have the crisis of the debt, which we didn't have that time because it was after HIPIC and so forth. But today, the biggest challenge, of course, is the war in Eastern Europe, Ukraine and Russia. Luckily enough for us, in terms of the channel of the food prices, Zambia's main staples, maize and also wheat, and in both commodities, we are either self-sufficient or almost self-sufficient. So on the food side, I think we are not worried. Where we are hit badly is on the price of fuel. Mm-hmm. Of course, the price of fuel has gone up quite substantially, hence the pressure for us to subsidize, which we said, unfortunately, we can't afford. But we are looking internally on how we can create a system that delivers fuel more efficiently. More expensive as it is, but can we engineer the process of delivery from where the fuel comes from into Zambia so that an efficient system can assist to moderate the impact. So what are we doing? First thing is that government, which used to import fuel and sell it to the private sector, government is withdrawing from the supply of fuel. In the place of that, we are encouraging as many private sector people, suppliers as possible to supply the fuel, and we believe that as they compete, they should be able to reduce their margins and give the comfort that we are looking for. Of course, there are also issues of suspected corruption when government gets involved. So by withdrawing, I think any inefficiencies that were coming out of that will, of course, be dealt with.
Okay.
The other thing that we are doing on the fuel, we have a pipeline from Dar es Salaam coming to Zambia, which used to supply crude oil into our refinery. We have a refinery. But this refinery, because it is small, low economies of scale, it was producing more expensive fuel compared to if we were to import finished products. So now we have said, this refinery, for now, it will not refine the crude because it's producing expensive thing. Instead, you private people import the finished stuff. And as we import the finished stuff, we are rehabilitating the pipeline so that the pipeline carries finished products from Dar es Salaam into Zambia. And the pipeline, the transportation cost of the pipeline of fuel is only a third
of shipping it,
of bringing it using trucks.
Okay.
So we believe that with these structural changes that are taking place in the energy sector, the price increase will be moderated. And of course, at some point, the price of fuel, even on the international market, will come down and the Zambian people will benefit.
Thank you, Minister. You know, it strikes me that your reform agenda is incredibly ambitious. Huh? Here you have trying to engineer strong growth recovery, mining, etc. A recovery also that has to be labor intensive to be able to create, you know, the jobs that you need for all the people that are entering the labor market. And you still have the debt issue unresolved. The restructuring that you're seeking still has not been effected. If you could say a little bit about how the international community can help you to advance this very ambitious set of reforms that you have in mind, including addressing the debt challenge that you face.
The most immediate thing, of course, is how we can address this challenge. Thank you very much to you and your staff. We go to the staff level agreement, but now we need to go to the IMF full program, which will also give us the concession of financing. But we have a problem, as you are aware. we've been waiting for the committees to sit. And while we are here, I hope we can get some clarity from you and the colleagues from the World Bank on how we can move forward, because for now, it is stalled. The other route that we are talking about, how the international community can help, we want to see a cooperation that is based on private sector taking a more leading role rather than official assistance. I think it's clear to everybody that countries that have made a difference, whether I'm talking about Mauritius, Vietnam, Philippines, Thailand, it is the private sector acting a very strong engine of economic growth that pulls so many people out of poverty. Mm-hmm. So we talk to our partners, yes, traditional aid, but much more. Let's focus on how we can bring in that private capital from the developed world so that they create jobs, create more taxable revenue within the country. I think that is more sustainable.
So what is the constraint on that? What is the constraint on eliciting more private investment in your country?
We have to do our part, which is to create an environment that makes those seeking profit to come and make it. We tax them, and they are happy, and we are happy. That mindset change, which the Asians realized 30, 40 years ago, that if you make profit motive to be strong, you actually sort out a lot of problems. But also on the side of the developed country where there's more capital, I think they have to realize that money can be made in Africa. Mm-hmm. Okay, they have to make. They should not see Africa as a place where you go with charity. They should see Africa as a place where you can actually go and make money. You pay your taxes, and you generate employment. So those two things, resolving the debt issue, getting rid of this stalemate that we are seeing now, and also getting investments into Africa.
Thank you so much, Minister Musokotwane. Really has been very, very illuminating discussion, conversation on the challenges you face and how you're addressing them. From IMF in Washington, I wish you all a very good day. Thank you so much, Minister.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure. Thank you so much.